Great. On that, I am delighted to welcome our second keynote, Fiona Strens, who will be speaking on why research collaborations are critical to ensuring resilient and cybersecure industries. Fiona is currently a professor of practice at the University of Strathclyde, leading their security and resilience activities. Prior to that, Fiona was co-founder and CEO of Crowdfish, a startup that grew to be a dominant provider of real-time data on the movement of people and crowds in busy venues. Before that, Fiona worked as a consultant in the national security sector and as an MOD senior civil servant, and started her career with a computer sciences degree from Cambridge. So with that, I'm delighted to hand over to you, Fiona. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Hopefully you can hear me fine. I'll assume so unless you wave at me.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the afternoon session. I hope I can kick off with something that keeps your attention, following on from what I found anyway, it to be a pretty fascinating and sort of varied morning. As Sarah said, I've had quite a varied career. I started in government, I went into industry, I went all entrepreneurial for about 10 years, and now I'm in a university. And I think that's important to reflect on that, actually, because I'm quite unusual. I don't think that many people have sort of jumped around quite as much as that. And of course, when you're thinking about collaboration, and this came up in the conversation earlier about secondments as well, having that mutual understanding of different people's incentives and cultures and environments is absolutely critical to sort of creating sustainable collaborations, at least. So this is a sort of theme that I'll come back to. But anyhow, just to sort of kick this off, I'm going to wear the hat that I had when I was co-founder and CEO of this company, CrowdVision, which was a small British company that grew into something much bigger and quite international, and is now actually part of another company called Sky5. So it started all about 10 years ago, and that, of course, was a time when IoT, I think, wasn't really a particularly widely understood term. I think we were probably sort of an IoT company, but you can form your own views on that. I'll tell you a little bit about what we did, because I think it's important just to get the context out there. Basically, what we did was we put sensors, and initially these were digital IP cameras, but we used a lot of different sensors over time, things like LiDARs and other things. And we had edge processing. So we put these sensors into customer locations. So these are places like airports or venues, expos, those kind of locations. We had edge processors alongside the sensors. We started off with things that looked a bit like a Raspberry Pi. In fact, we did use Raspberry Pis in the early days. Sometimes server, edge processing running on server, sometimes the edge processing embedded in the sensors, lots of different combinations. And at the edge, we ran computer vision and detection algorithms. And what we were trying to do was to work out where everyone was in these busy locations over space, and then to look at that data over time as well, how they're moving, how people are clustering, how they're crowding, how they're queuing. And you can get to things like throughput rates and so on from that as well. We sent all that data back to our cloud instances, and we were running a whole load of other data, sort of aggregation and processing and insight type algorithms there. And all of this was really the back end of it, if you like, because what the users were interested in was real-time data, accurate data on how people are using their venues. And sometimes that was very real time, and it was for operational interventions, maybe safety interventions. It's getting overcrowded over there, you need to do something about it. Someone looking at an app with a big alert on it. Or sometimes it was more subtle about customer experience and communication. And then an awful lot of the data was obviously aggregated over time and used for planning and scheduling purposes. So how many security lanes do I need open in my airport, for example? Use cases ranging from safety and security right through to customer experience and sort of operational efficiency. So we had the same kind of setup over multiple locations around the world. So we had, in most locations, we would have hundreds or even, usually hundreds of sensors, sometimes thousands. And we were creating very large data sets, both private ones for our customers and also more shareable ones. And of course, this whole system had to be maintained kind of highly available, secure, supported, 24/7, 365, all of that. So that's what we did, or was it? Well, that was the plan. Actually, the whole endeavour was full, I think, of complexity and challenge, and these sort of challenges are common to many IoT and AI companies. So I'll just elaborate on this a bit, because I think it's important to understand how research collaboration kind of fit into all of this. So we were a small company, startup, based in London. We're working for mega customers around the world, and I don't think that's an unusual experience for startups. The customers clearly wanted something that worked functionally. They wanted accurate, actionable data. They wanted it in their apps and dashboards and all of that. We were using quite a lot of AI techniques, and so we had to go through the whole process of kind of building confidence about validation and verification techniques around some of that stuff. They wanted high availability. So some of them integrated our data into their core critical systems. So availability was always something we had to manage very tightly. They didn't just want the bit we produced, our product, they wanted it integrated into their whole digital world. They were worried about privacy. We were tracking people essentially, and they were worried about their customers' privacy concerns, real and perceived. They're worried about us putting things like sensors and edge processors into their built environment. You know, would the things that we're putting in ceilings have a fire risk attached to them, or, you know, how are they going to be maintained? And many of our customers were iconic brands and locations. So think about things like Heathrow Airport, JFK Airport, Marina Bay Sands, you know, Canary Wharf, those kind of names. And with that, obviously, becomes an enhanced terrorist risk, as well as the normal sort of criminals and hackers and so on around these big brands. So they were concerned that our installations, this small tech company, our installations, you know, were creating essentially new attack surfaces in their world. And they wanted high levels of confidence around our end-to-end security solution. They were really worried about the bits we made and controlled, but also about the bits we might have embedded in there. You're all experts, you'll understand software libraries and components embedded in our sort of end-to-end solution. And fundamentally, they were worried about their reputation if we screwed up. So it's all quite challenging. And the thing when you're in a small company, and I will talk a little bit about bigger companies, but in a small company is you're always just running this amazing race. You're racing to prove the value of your offering to customers. You know, you haven't made it until you've got those customers adopting at scale. You're racing to get ahead, you're racing to stay ahead, you're racing a lot of the time just to survive, definitely to thrive. You're really strapped for money and you're really strapped for people. So you're obviously focusing on the core, you build the bits that you think really matter, you prove the functionality and the value. That's what you're passionate about, your value proposition. But then it starts to get really, really tough when you're working with these kind of customers that I've described, because they throw a load of solutions architects at you and scary systems integrators and testers who want to test your difficult to test algorithms. And they ask questions about how you're using the cloud and your cloud instances. They might ask you to remove or explain at least the vulnerable components in your stack. They throw security accreditation processes at you and do penetration tests and start to ask, tell you how many nines they want in your availability service level agreements. And of course, they expect a lot of love and support all the way through that journey. So on the journey from startup to kind of grown up, you realize basically you've built half the solution. You're focused on the functionality and the bits that are really, you know, that everyone's focused on, but you haven't done the rest. And at that point, you start spending more money, more time on rebasing, refactoring, reforming things to create something more ready for these kind of difficult customers. And it's a long and bumpy ride. And all the way through it, you're entrepreneurial, you're determined. You start thinking about how you get great people helping you and how you get great partners sort of helping you move that on. And that's really in the context that I want to ask the question, you know, how can universities come into this and how can that sort of SME academia relationship add value, but also you can extend some of that into sort of bigger industry and academic relationships, I think. So reflecting back, at CrowdVision, we did work with universities to some extent, okay? We recruited university-educated people. We were always after the best developers with particular skills. to the extent that actually it was a primary criteria for where we chose to set up a UK office in Belfast, because we were seeing a nice flow of graduates to hire coming out of the two universities there that were really good at sort of computer science and cybersecurity and so on. And we invested in getting to know them and tried to get at the front of the pipeline. Our CTO, Dr. Anders Johansson, he was an academic by background. He had visiting roles at universities, and he created relationships there that were beneficial to the company. So we did things like work with sometimes PhD, but normally master's student projects. We would empower them with our really interesting big data, and they would do some interesting analysis for us, things like testing out alternative algorithms, that kind of thing. So that was very beneficial. We were connected to a sort of international network of research-intensive academics who were focused on understanding both the physicality and the psychology of crowds and crowd movements and crowd behaviors. And that was very beneficial to us in shaping up our value proposition and putting some confidence around it as well with our customers. We funded some short projects with sort of individual academics. And actually one of those was focused on sort of end-to-end cybersecurity solutions as we were preparing for some serious US end accreditation. And we did join academics and others in bidding for some of those really big programs out there. So a couple were Horizon 2020 sort of programs. Actually, we never really got anywhere with that. And I don't know whether that's a typical experience, but it felt like a lot of effort in, and we never really got much back out of it, although it was an enjoyable experience. What we never really did, though, was create what you might call strategic and enduring research relationships. And I think it's important to ask why. So one reason is simply that we were always short of time and money, and there really was no appetite or space to do anything non-essential. And sometimes that even extended to research that you wanted to do. There's always this tension between the kind of long-term, getting ready for the next iterations and keeping ahead versus just dealing with today's challenges and making sure stuff works in a customer environment. If we could do it in-house, we did it in-house. If we could do it quickly, we did it quickly. And I suspect this is a behavior that afflicts lots of small companies, probably more so than the larger ones. But actually, any corporate is challenged to make a return on investment business case around research unless it's focused on very specific and kind of business critical goals of the company. More recently, I've spent a couple of years working in a university environment. I work at the University of Strathclyde. I've been trying to help connect customers, so government, industry people, to academics who have the capability that could be valuable to them. And I've tried to co-create some research and innovation activity. And I think my biggest observation is that I really, really didn't understand how academia worked when I arrived at a university. And we heard this earlier. I think that's a very typical thing. I understand it a little bit better now, but I think there is a whole load of education and awareness raising that needs to go on here if we're going to establish, really sustainable and high quality collaborations. When I now think about academia, I think about a system. In the UK, there's a UK academic system. It's situated in an international system. It is a system, I think. It has its own momentum, behaviours, culture, ways of working. And therefore, it's sort of, it's not that easy to change always. Obviously, in the UK, it's sort of driven by the financial necessity that universities have to maximise student numbers, but also by the sort of policies, processes, and behaviours of the big grant funders and the sort of overall academic system. So a university really is not like a big company. There isn't the central command and control structure there. It's a loosely connected and lightly controlled set of hundreds of academics, each in a way competing to grow their own research teams, sort of like an association of sole traders, if you like. Once you zoom down to the research group level, I think the behavior there is a bit more like micro SMEs, actually. These people are hungry, they're entrepreneurial, they're competitive, they're obviously extremely bright and driven. So there are some comparative behaviors there. Academics, though, have their success fundamentally measured on how many papers get published in nice, prestigious journeys, cited by, other academics. And the more funding you attract, the more PhD students and research associates you can hire, the more papers your team publishes and the more successful you become. So the absolute enabler here is finding those sources of funding, grant funding, customer funding. Grant funding is obviously preferred. It's the sort of dominant source, and that's because it respects the nature of the challenge of research. Larger, longer term, multi-year sort of research projects, recognizing the nature of research in terms of sort of, the openness of that process. I think on the customer side, it's harder, often much more about trying to solve problems, a bit more locked down, smaller size of projects and so on. But I don't know whether I'm running out of time, but just some creative solutions really are out there. So we mustn't forget that we're doing some pretty good jobs around some of this. We heard about some of them earlier from Sarah and others. At Strathclyde, there's an interesting model around very successful industry co-funded membership centres. So there's a whole Power Networks consortium with power companies co-investing in some structured research programs that they all share. That's been very successful. A very similar thing as well on the pharmaceuticals side with medical innovation. And sometimes we see things like PETRAS, obviously, where there's a sort of academic-led model coalescing with some grant funding around it. And I think that's really, really helpful in terms of providing ways for this community to coalesce and share knowledge and so on. The benefits can be absolutely compelling if we get this right. 200,000 academics, 500,000 postgraduate students working in the UK at any point in time. Which government or industry customer can ignore that at a time when workforces and access to skills is so challenging? But making it happen is still quite hard, I think. And in the UK, maybe more than in some other nations, we've allowed our sort of government system, our industry system and our academic system to grow up slightly separately. And they come together sometimes. It's maybe not as designed or deliberate an approach as you get in some other nations. And I do wonder whether it's time to reassess a bit. I don't have a particularly strong view on it, but maybe it's time to get to a place where, academia and academics understand industry and entrepreneurs better. And we have a bit of think about how we sort of move this whole discussion forward. So I'll stop there. I think PETRAS is a great thing, and I've really enjoyed this morning as well. But yeah, maybe one of the things that PETRAS, in my view, needs to do is make sure the need for change or the need for improvement in some of the ways we can make collaboration effective is expressed out there. I'm sure you're doing that, because I do sense that some sort of change is probably needed at this stage. I'll stop there. Thank you.